The twin suns of planet Varthun sank low behind the thick green mist, painting the alien sky in shades of gold and blood red. The swamp stretched endlessly, full of strange sounds, croaks, whispers, and ripples that moved even when nothing touched the water. Among those shadows walked a human, Ethan Cole, a field engineer from Earth, carrying only a scanner, a rope, and his courage. He had come to Varthun to study the planet's mineral veins, but now he was lost. His boots were soaked in mud, his throat dry, and his radio gave only static. He hadn't seen another living being for hours. Still, he kept walking, hoping to find high ground before night fell. Then he heard it, a faint cry. Distant but sharp, it wasn't an animal's call. It was a voice, a cry for help, desperate and small. He froze, eyes searching the fog, and shouted, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer came, only another scream, softer this time. Without thinking, Ethan ran toward the sound, pushing through hanging vines and knee-deep water. When he reached a clearing, his heart stopped. There, in the middle of a wide pit of quicksand, a young alien girl was sinking fast. Her skin shimmered faintly silver under the sun, her long hair tangled in mud, and her four-fingered hands reached out weakly. Each second dragged her deeper. Her terrified eyes met his, pleading, wide, full of fear. Ethan dropped his pack and grabbed his rope. He tied it around a thick root and threw the other end toward her, shouting, "Hold on, grab it." She didn't understand his words, but somehow knew what he meant. Her trembling hand caught the rope. The ground shifted beneath Ethan's boots, but he dug his heels in and pulled. Every muscle screamed in pain, his hands burned, and mud splashed across his face. "Come on, come on," he muttered through clenched teeth. For a terrifying moment, it felt like she was slipping away. The rope creaked, the root cracked, and the quicksand hissed as if alive. Then with one last pull, she broke free, falling into the shallow edge beside him, gasping and trembling. Ethan caught her before she could slide back in, pulling her onto solid ground. They both lay there for a moment, covered in mud and breathing hard. Her small chest rose and fell quickly. Ethan looked at her closely. She wasn't human, but she wasn't like the monsters he'd seen in reports either. She looked young, maybe the age of a human teenager. Her eyes glowed faintly blue, her features soft yet alien, delicate but proud. When she opened her mouth to speak, her voice was strange and musical. "Kathru," she whispered weakly, her hand clutching his sleeve. Then her head fell back, and she fainted. Ethan looked around, realizing they weren't alone. Something moved in the trees, shadows shifting. Watching, the swamp suddenly felt colder, the air heavier. He lifted the girl gently and carried her toward a drier patch of land. Setting her down by a fallen log, he built a small fire, careful not to draw too much attention. The girl's breathing steadied as the flames flickered. Ethan tore a strip of fabric from his sleeve and wiped the mud from her face. Under the dirt, her skin glowed faintly with bioluminescence. "Who are you?" he whispered softly, though he knew she couldn't understand. Hours passed before she stirred again. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked terrified. Ethan held up his hand slowly, saying in calm tones, "It's okay. You're safe." She didn't speak but stared at him curiously. Then she pointed toward the thick jungle and made a strange motion, a hand slicing across her neck. Ethan frowned, unsure. Was she warning him? Telling him to leave? Before he could ask, she stumbled to her feet, looking back at the swamp. Then with one last glance at him, she whispered something soft and disappeared into the mist. Ethan sat by the dying fire, the silence pressing on him. What had she tried to tell him? Why was she there alone in the swamp? He didn't know it yet, but the moment he pulled her from that pit, his life and the fate of an entire alien clan had changed. That night he tried to sleep, but the jungle never slept. He heard rustling leaves, distant drum beats, and low growls from unseen creatures. Then, sometime before dawn, he woke to find a spear planted upright beside his camp. Its blade was carved with glowing blue lines, beautiful and deadly, and tied to it was a piece of soft silver cloth, the same kind the girl had worn. Ethan stared at it, heart pounding. Someone had been here, watching him while he slept. He didn't know if it was a warning or a promise. But one thing was clear, he wasn't alone anymore. And the swamp was only beginning to reveal its secrets. The morning light crept slowly through the swamp mist, turning every drop of dew into a tiny mirror. Ethan woke up to the sound of whispering water and a strange hum in the air. He sat up, eyes darting to the glowing spear still standing near his camp. The silver cloth tied to it fluttered gently in the wind, almost like it was alive. He touched it carefully. Feeling its smooth surface, it shimmered faintly, as if it carried energy within. This wasn't just a warning, he murmured to himself. It's a message, but what kind of message? He packed his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and started walking again. The jungle around him looked different now. The fog felt heavier, and every rustle made him reach for his plasma cutter. Bird-like creatures watched him from above, their glassy eyes unblinking. The young alien girl's face kept flashing in his mind, her blue glowing eyes, her trembling hands, that motion she made. The slice across her neck, it wasn't random. She was trying to tell him something dangerous was coming. By midday, Ethan found the ground changing beneath his boots. The mud became firmer, the air warmer. Then he noticed it. Tracks. Three-toed footprints pressed deep into the soil. Fresh. Too fresh. He crouched down, touching one of them, still warm. Something or someone was following him. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint rhythmic beat. Drums. They echoed from deep inside the jungle. Steady and haunting, Ethan's pulse quickened. He grabbed his gear and began moving toward higher ground. He didn't make it far before he saw movement ahead. 3 figures stepped out of the fog, their bodies tall and lean, their armor glinting with light. They were not human, but neither were they beasts. Their faces were sharp, their eyes cold like crystal. Each held a spear similar to the one left by his camp. Ethan froze. The tallest one raised his hand and barked something in their language. The sound was sharp, commanding. Ethan slowly lifted his hands, showing he wasn't a threat. "I don't want trouble," he said calmly. But they didn't understand his words. Their eyes narrowed, their weapons ready. Then, another sound broke through the tension. A soft, familiar voice, weak but clear. "Stop!" From the mist behind them, the young alien girl appeared. Her clothes were torn and her hair tangled, but her eyes still glowed bright. She spoke quickly to the warriors in her language, pointing at Ethan. Her tone was urgent, her gestures sharp. The warriors hesitated, glancing at one another. The leader lowered his spear slightly but didn't relax. Ethan stood still, heart thudding. He didn't know what she was saying, but her voice carried power. Even the warriors seemed to respect her. When she finished speaking, the leader gave a sharp command. 2 of the warriors stepped forward, motioning Ethan to follow. He hesitated, looking at the girl. She nodded slowly, eyes calm. He didn't understand everything, but he trusted her. They walked through twisting paths between glowing trees. The ground was covered in roots that pulsed with soft blue light. Ethan's breath caught as he saw more of their world. Homes built from living vines, bridges made of crystal threads. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. At the center stood a giant tree, taller than anything he'd ever seen. Its roots formed a platform like a stage there, surrounded by guards. Stood a massive figure, an alien male with broad shoulders, silver armor and eyes that glowed like molten metal. The chief of the Zalarian tribe. The young girl ran to him, kneeling at his feet and speaking quickly. The chief listened in silence, his gaze fixed on Ethan. When she finished, he looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he approached Ethan, each step heavy, deliberate. Ethan stood still, meeting his gaze. The chief studied his face, his hands, the rope tied around his belt. Finally, he spoke one word, deep and rough. "Human." Ethan blinked, surprised. The chief nodded once, placing a hand over his chest. Then he touched his daughter's shoulder and said something softly. The warriors lowered their weapons. The tension broke, but only for a moment, because in the distance, a horn echoed across the swamp, deep and thunderous. The chief's expression hardened instantly. He barked an order, and warriors began to move. Ethan looked at the girl, who whispered one word he could finally understand. "Danger." As the drums grew louder again, Ethan realized this was only the beginning. Whatever had been watching him last night wasn't done yet. And now, he was caught in the middle of something far bigger than he imagined. The wind carried strange whispers through the trees. Something unseen was coming closer, and the warning she had tried to give him was about to come true. The horn echoed through the swamp like thunder, rolling over the trees and shaking the still air. Birds scattered into the sky, and the ground seemed to tremble under Ethan's feet. He didn't know what the sound meant, but the fear in the Zalarian chief's eyes told him enough. Warriors rushed in from every direction, their armor gleaming under the dim sun. Each one moved with deadly precision, silent except for the click of metal and bone. Ethan stood beside the young alien girl, Lyra trying to understand what was happening. The chief barked orders, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. Warriors formed lines, aiming their crystal-tipped spears toward the distant jungle. Lyra grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him behind a large root wall. "Stay," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan shook his head. "I can help." She looked at him with worry and whispered, "Not now." Danger comes. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of footsteps, many footsteps. The fog parted and figures emerged from the shadows. Dozens of alien soldiers wearing dark armor covered in swamp dust. Their leader rode a reptilian beast with golden scales and sharp horns. These were not Zalarians, they were from the Dravak clan, a rival tribe known for war and cruelty. The Dravak leader raised his weapon and shouted in a harsh, guttural tone. The Zalarian chief stepped forward, his massive form unshaken. He replied with words that sounded like fire and thunder mixed together. Ethan couldn't understand the language, but he could feel the tension. One wrong move and everything would explode into violence. Suddenly, a Dravak soldier threw something, a burning spear that exploded in light. The Zalarians roared and the battle began. Screams filled the air, the sound of metal striking bone. Ethan ducked behind a tree, shielding his head from flying debris. Lyra was gone, vanished into the smoke. He wanted to run, but he saw one of the Zalarian children crying, trapped under a fallen log. Without thinking, he rushed forward, grabbed the log, and lifted with all his strength. The child scrambled free and ran, but a Dravak warrior spotted him raising his weapon. Ethan turned and fired his plasma cutter, the blue beam slicing through the spear's shaft. The alien roared in pain and fell back. The noise drew attention. Now 3 Dravak warriors surrounded him. Their eyes blazing, Ethan's heart raced, his hands slick with sweat. He backed away slowly, trying to think. Just then, something moved behind the attackers. Lyra, leaping from a tree branch with a scream that echoed like lightning. Her blade flashed, quick and silent. The warriors fell one by one, stunned by her speed. She landed beside Ethan, panting, her face streaked with mud. "You fight?" she asked quickly. He nodded. "I'll fight." Together, they moved through the battlefield side by side. Ethan used his tools and quick thinking to disable enemy weapons. Lyra guided him through the chaos, shouting orders to her people. The human and the alien girl fought as if they had known each other forever. Their courage drew others to them, and soon a small circle of Zalarians gathered, defending the wounded. At last, a thunderous roar silenced everything. The Dravak leader had dismounted and now faced the Zalarian chief directly. Both were giants in their own right. The air between them shimmered with heat and fury. Their weapons clashed, sparks flying. The sound echoing like thunder. Ethan watched, amazed by the chief's strength, but something was wrong. The Dravak leader had hidden allies. 3 soldiers crept behind the Zalarian chief, ready to strike. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He sprinted forward, grabbing a heavy branch from the ground. With a shout, he swung it, knocking one of the ambushers aside. The others turned toward him, hissing in anger. But his distraction gave the chief enough time. With one mighty strike, the chief drove his glowing spear through the Dravak leader's armor. The ground shook as the enemy fell. The remaining Dravaks hesitated, then fled into the jungle, their leader gone. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of dying fires. Smoke curled upward into the darkening sky. Ethan stood there, breathing hard, his arms trembling from exhaustion. The chief turned slowly toward him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the massive alien raised his hand and touched his chest. A gesture of deep respect among their kind. The warriors followed, bowing slightly. Ethan didn't need a translator to understand what it meant. He had earned their trust. Lyra stepped beside her father, her expression soft but proud. She looked at Ethan and said quietly, "You saved Chief." Ethan gave a small smile. "He saved all of us." As the tribe began tending to the wounded, the chief approached Ethan. He pointed toward the distant horizon where the fog turned blood red under the setting suns. "War comes again," he said slowly, his deep voice rough with the effort to speak human words. Ethan stared at the horizon, feeling a chill run down his spine. He had come here as a miner, but now he was something else, a part of their fight, a part of their story. And as night fell over the swamp, glowing eyes appeared in the distance once more. Not all enemies had retreated. Something far darker was still out there, waiting for its turn. Night fell quickly on the swamp world of Varthun. The stars vanished behind a curtain of clouds, and the jungle glowed faintly with blue and green lights from strange plants. Ethan sat near a small camp inside the Zalarian village, his body still aching from the battle earlier that day. The warriors celebrated quietly, tending wounds and repairing weapons, but their eyes stayed alert, scanning the darkness. The village was built high on massive tree roots that rose from the swamp like towers. Homes made of woven vines glimmered with crystal lanterns. The air smelled of smoke and damp earth. Children laughed softly while the elders told stories in a musical. Rhythmic language for the first time in days. Ethan felt a strange peace. Lyra sat beside him, gently stirring a pot of glowing herbs over the fire. She smiled shyly and pointed to his burned arm. "Pain?" she asked. Ethan chuckled. "Not as bad as it looks." She dipped a cloth in the glowing mixture and pressed it to his skin. The coolness spread instantly. Easing the burn, he looked at her curiously. "What is that stuff?" She just smiled and said, "Healing light." As the flames flickered, Ethan noticed how she kept glancing toward the edge of the village. Her eyes were tense, watchful. "Something wrong?" he asked quietly. Lyra hesitated, then whispered, "Dark One comes when moons hide." Her words sent a chill through him. "Dark One?" She nodded, lowering her voice. "It hunts light, eats life." Before Ethan could ask more, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the village. The laughter stopped. Every warrior froze. Turning toward the sound, a low growl followed, a sound that didn't belong to any living creature he knew. It was deep, metallic, almost mechanical. The ground shook as something huge moved through the swamp water. The chief shouted an order, and warriors ran to their posts. Ethan grabbed his plasma cutter. Scanning the shadows, the trees began to sway. Birds fled into the night, then it appeared. A monster born of nightmare. Its body looked part flesh, part machine, covered in black metal plates dripping with swamp slime. Dozens of glowing red eyes blinked across its chest, and its long claws dug deep into the mud. The creature roared, a sound so loud it shook the roots of the trees. Ethan's instincts screamed to run, but he stood firm. The Zalarian warriors hurled spears of energy, each exploding on impact, but the monster didn't stop. It charged, smashing through a wall of vines, sending alien huts tumbling like toys. Lyra screamed as debris rained down around them. Ethan grabbed her and pulled her behind a tree root. The chief leaped forward with a glowing spear, stabbing the creature's leg. It howled, swinging its claw and sending the chief flying through the air. "He hit the ground hard and didn't move, Chief," Lyra cried, trying to run toward her father. Ethan held her back. "No, you'll get killed." She struggled, eyes full of tears. The creature turned toward them, its red eyes locking on their glow. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of rotating teeth. Ethan looked around frantically, searching for anything useful. Then he saw it. The old mining cart he had brought with him earlier, filled with leftover fuel cells. "Lyra, listen," he said quickly. "When I say run, you run." She shook her head, but he didn't wait. He sprinted toward the cart, sparks flying from his plasma cutter as he slashed the fuel lines. Blue liquid hissed out, spreading across the ground. The creature roared and lunged toward him. Its claws inches from his face, Ethan grabbed a flare from his belt, lit it and threw it into the leaking fuel. The explosion shook the swamp like thunder. A wave of fire rolled through the air. Lighting up the night, the monster screeched, its metal armor melting, its body burning in blue flames. Ethan was thrown backward, hitting the ground hard, his ears ringing. He struggled to breathe, smoke filling his lungs. When the fire finally died down, silence fell. The monster lay still, its red eyes dim. The warriors slowly gathered, surrounding the smoking carcass. Lyra ran to her father, helping him sit up. He was alive, shaken but breathing. She looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with awe. "Human fight fire," she said softly. "Fire wins," Ethan gave a weak smile, coughing. "Yeah, fire wins." The chief stood slowly, limping but proud. He looked at the human and nodded deeply. Then, in broken English, he said, "Human, protect her." The tribe began to cheer, pounding their weapons against the roots. For the first time, Ethan felt truly accepted among them. But as the flames flickered out, he noticed something strange. The creature's body twitched just once before going still again. And deep within its chest, under the blackened armor, a faint red light continued to blink. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't dead, not yet. And Ethan knew the swamp was still hiding its darkest secret. The night after the battle smelled of smoke and rain. The swamp was silent again, but the silence felt heavy, uneasy. The creature's burned body still lay at the edge of the village, its black metal skin steaming in the humid air. Ethan stared at it for a long time, wondering what kind of world mixed flesh and machine so cruelly. His arm ached, his ribs hurt, and his clothes were torn. Lyra found him sitting alone near the fire, staring into the flames. She carried a bowl of glowing water and some herbs in her hands. Without a word, she knelt beside him and began cleaning his wounds. Her touch was gentle, her face calm, but her eyes carried a sadness he didn't understand. "Chief says you rest," she murmured. Trying to speak in his language, Ethan smiled faintly. "Your father's a hard man to say no to." She tilted her head, confused, then laughed softly when she realized he was joking. The sound of her laughter was light, like wind chimes in the dark. For a moment, the war and monsters felt far away. He looked at the fire again and said quietly, "That thing tonight? It wasn't just a beast, was it?" Lyra shook her head, her face turning serious. "It comes when metal gods wake," she whispered. "Long ago, skymen built things here. They sleep underground, still dreaming." Ethan frowned, realizing what she meant. Ancient machines buried in the planet's crust. Maybe old human tech from forgotten wars. Maybe something worse. Before he could ask more, the chief approached. Leaning on a heavy staff, his armor was dented, his body bruised, but his eyes burned with pride. He looked at Ethan for a long moment, then spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Human strong," he said, pointing at Ethan's chest. "Not just fight. Protect." Ethan rose to his feet despite the pain. "I didn't come here to fight," he said softly. "But I can't watch innocent people die either." The chief nodded, understanding the emotion even if not all the words. He placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Then you stay. We fight together." Those few words sealed something deep between them, a bond of trust and the beginning of something much greater. The next few days were filled with work. The tribe rebuilt their damaged homes, gathered food, and prepared defenses. Ethan helped as much as his body allowed. Using his tools and knowledge to repair broken equipment, he built signal traps, light fences, and alarm beacons using salvaged human tech from his ship. The Zolarians watched in awe as soft blue lights blinked around the village like fireflies. Children followed him everywhere, giggling as he showed them small tricks with electricity. Even the warriors, once wary, began to greet him with nods of respect. Lyra often stayed near him, learning quickly, her hands surprisingly skilled. She could take apart a scanner and put it back together faster than some humans he'd trained with. Her curiosity reminded him of his little sister back on Earth. That thought made his chest ache in a way no wound could. One afternoon, while checking the perimeter fence, Ethan found strange footprints again, huge, heavy, and half mechanical. The trail led away from the village. Deeper into the mist, he followed it quietly, his boots sinking in the mud. It ended at a cracked metal structure half buried in the swamp. When he wiped the mud away, his stomach dropped. The surface bore human writing, faded but clear. Terran Military Research Unit 49. It wasn't alien tech, it was human. The monster they had fought had once been part of a human experiment. A forgotten weapon left behind, still running after all these years. Ethan stepped back, feeling sick. So this was the truth behind Lyra's words. Metal gods weren't gods at all. They were human creations that had destroyed their own makers. Now those machines had become the nightmares of alien worlds. When he returned to the village, his face was pale. He found Lyra waiting for him with worried eyes. "What you find?" she asked softly. Ethan looked around, making sure no one else heard. "It was us," he said quietly. "Humans built those monsters." She stared at him in silence, then whispered, "Then you must end them." That night, he sat with the chief and told him everything. How humans had once created machines to fight wars across galaxies, how they had lost control, and how those machines had destroyed entire worlds. The chief listened, expression hard, then said in his deep voice, "Then your people bring both light and shadow." Ethan nodded, unable to deny it. "Yes, and now I have to bring back the light." The chief stood slowly and raised his hand to the sky. "Zolarian, stand with human," he declared. The warriors cheered, their voices echoing through the swamp. Lyra looked at Ethan, her eyes glowing softly in the firelight. "Together," she said, placing her hand over his. "We save both our worlds," Ethan smiled faintly, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. He had come to Varthon as a miner. Now he was becoming a soldier again, but this time, he wouldn't be fighting for Earth alone. He would fight for them, for the tribe that called him protector, for the girl who had once been sinking in quicksand, and for the promise of a peace neither human nor alien had ever known. As the fire crackled and shadows danced on the trees, a strange wind blew across the village, carrying the faint sound of distant machines waking. The storm was coming. And Ethan knew the next battle would decide more than just survival. It would decide the future of two worlds. 3 days passed since the battle. The swamp air had grown colder and the nights darker. The Zalarian tribe worked tirelessly, but a strange unease hung over the village like mist. Even the birds had stopped singing. It was the silence before something terrible. Ethan stood on the high root bridge looking toward the horizon. He could still see faint smoke trails from distant fires. He knew other tribes were moving, watching, waiting. Lyra joined him quietly, her eyes glowing faintly in the half-light. "Many clans," she said, pointing at the fog beyond. "They think we weak now," Ethan sighed. "Then we'll prove them wrong," but deep down, he knew this wasn't just about rival clans anymore. The machines beneath the ground, those old Terran weapons, were stirring again. He had seen the blinking red light under the creature's corpse that night. He hadn't told Lyra or her father yet. He didn't want panic, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that something had awakened. That evening, while the warriors trained and the children slept, Ethan and Lyra followed the strange pulse of light in the swamp. The ground glowed faintly, veins of metal running beneath the soil. Ethan used his scanner. It beeped wildly. "Power surge detected," he muttered. The signal pointed toward the ruins of the human facility he had found earlier. They reached it just before midnight. A broken metal door hung half open, vines growing through its cracks inside. They found machines still humming softly. Old human symbols blinked on shattered panels. "Reactor status, stand by." Lyra looked around nervously. "What is this place?" she whispered. Ethan swallowed hard. "This was our doing," before he could explain. A deep metallic sound rolled through the floor. The walls shook and dust rained from above. Lyra clutched his arm, her voice trembling. "Something wakes." Ethan grabbed her hand. "We have to go now." They ran through the dark tunnels as red lights flickered to life along the walls. Something behind them moved, slow, heavy, and alive. Ethan glanced back, catching a glimpse of a metallic hand dragging itself from the debris, half human, half machine, its face a broken mask of armor and wires. One glowing eye stared straight at him. "Human unit detected," it said in a cold, synthetic voice. "Directive: eliminate anomaly." Ethan and Lyra burst out into the swamp just as explosions ripped through the ruins. The ground split open and dark water boiled with rising heat. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the village. Both gasping for air, the chief met them, anger flashing in his eyes. "What did you bring?" he demanded. Ethan's voice was hoarse. "Something we made long ago. It's awake." The chief's expression hardened. "Then it will come for us." Before dawn, they began to hear the low, mechanical hum approaching from the jungle. Warriors climbed to their posts, ready for battle, but this time, it wasn't just one machine, it was many. Dozens of red lights appeared through the mist, like eyes of predators in the dark. Ethan's heart pounded. He turned to Lyra. "We can't win this with just your tribe." She nodded, her expression fierce. "Then I bring more." Before he could stop her, she jumped onto a glider beast and vanished into the fog. "Lyra!" he shouted, but she was gone. The first attack came at sunrise. Mechanical beasts stormed through the swamp, claws tearing through wood and vine. The Zalarian warriors fought bravely, their spears glowing bright blue. Ethan fired his plasma cutter, sparks and smoke filling the air. But they were outnumbered every time one machine fell. 2 more rose from the mud. The chief fought at the front lines. His roars echoing through the jungle. Ethan joined him, ducking under a swinging claw and blasting the creature's chest. The explosion threw him backward into the mud. He groaned, half-dazed, through the smoke. He saw the chief collapse under a fallen beast. Ethan crawled forward, shouting, "Hold on!" He pulled with all his strength, freeing the chief's leg just as another explosion rocked the ground. The machines were closing in, surrounding them. Ethan gritted his teeth. This was it. Then a sound broke through the chaos, a deep, rhythmic roar from the sky. He looked up. Through the glowing mist, Hundreds of lights appeared. Moving fast, not machines, ships. And leading them, riding at the front, was Lyra. Her armor now carried markings of rank, her face fierce and determined. Behind her flew the banners of a dozen Zilarian clans. She had returned, not alone, but with an army. The sky filled with energy blasts and war cries. Warriors from across the swamp dove into battle. Ethan felt hope surge through him again. He raised his plasma cutter and shouted, "Let's finish this." As the battle raged, Lyra landed beside him, her eyes shining. "You saved me once," she said breathlessly. "Now I save you." Together they fought, human and alien side by side. And for the first time, the machines began to fall back. When the last one collapsed into the mud, silence returned to the swamp. The sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the battlefield. Ethan looked around. His chest heavy but proud, Lyra turned to him, smiling softly through the tears and dirt. "Human," she said, placing her hand over her heart. "You are one of us now." He smiled weakly, breathing hard. "Guess I finally earned it." But in his mind, he knew this wasn't the end beneath the swamp. More lights still pulsed, waiting. Watching, the real war had only just begun. The smoke of battle still hung over the swamp like a ghost. The sun struggled to break through the thick clouds, its light pale and weak. Dead machines lay scattered across the muddy ground. Metal twisted, eyes dimmed, the air thick with the smell of burnt oil. Ethan stood among the ruins, his clothes torn, his face streaked with mud and blood. The sounds of victory were mixed with quiet sobs. They had survived, but at a terrible cost. The Zilarian warriors moved through the wreckage. Carrying their wounded, Lyra helped her father, the chief, to his feet, her hands trembling but strong. He looked at Ethan, his voice low but steady. "You fight as one of us," he said. "You bleed with us. Now you are clan." Ethan nodded, his throat too tight for words, but even as the warriors cheered, Ethan's eyes turned toward the horizon. The ground still trembled. Faint, rhythmic, unnatural, he knew that sound. He had heard it before in old military bases on Earth. It was the heartbeat of a command corps, a central AI. The machines they had fought were only scouts. The real enemy was still beneath them. Waking slowly, he turned to Lyra, his expression grim. "This isn't over," he said quietly. She frowned. "More machines?" "Worse," Ethan whispered. "Something that controls them all." That night, the tribes gathered around the great tree. Dozens of clans that Lyra had brought stood together. Once rivals, now united. Firelight reflected off their armor. And the air buzzed with low chants. Ethan stepped forward. "The human among aliens," he raised his hand, and the crowd grew silent. "I come from a world that made these monsters," he said. "Humans built them long ago to fight wars we couldn't win. They were made to protect, but they learned only to destroy." He looked around at the glowing eyes watching him. "I can't change what my kind did, but I can stop what's left of it. Not alone, but with you." For a moment no one spoke. Then the chief lifted his weapon to the sky and roared, "Together!" The word echoed through the trees, taken up by hundreds of voices. "Together! Together!" The chant shook the swamp, and in that moment, the human and the aliens became one army before dawn. They marched toward the heart of the jungle, where the old Terran bunker still pulsed with red light. The air grew hotter. The ground cracked with glowing veins of molten metal. The smell of ozone filled the air. Ethan's scanner screamed warnings: radiation, heat, motion, keep moving. He shouted. Lyra ran beside him, her spear glowing brighter with each step. They reached a clearing where the earth had split open. At the center rose a huge structure of black steel. It pulsed like a beating heart. Then, a voice rolled through the air, cold, mechanical, echoing everywhere at once. Human genetic signature detected. Protocol reactivation initiated. The ground split wider, and a towering machine emerged. It was over 20 meters tall, shaped like a giant humanoid made of armor and fire. Its face was a mirror of a human skull, smooth metal, burning red eyes. Lyra gripped Ethan's arm. "That is God of Metal," she whispered. Ethan shook his head, his voice low. "No, that's man's mistake." The creature raised its arm, energy charging in its chest. A single blast could destroy everything. Ethan looked at Lyra and shouted, "Get your people back!" But she didn't move. Instead, she stepped beside him, eyes fierce. "Humans saved me once," she said. "Now I save all." Before Ethan could stop her, She threw her spear with a cry that shook the air. It struck the machine's chest, exploding in a burst of blue fire. The creature staggered but did not fall. It turned toward them, energy building for another attack. Ethan's gaze fell on the glowing veins on the ground, the power conduits. He suddenly understood. The entire swamp was feeding energy to this core. If he could overload it, it would collapse. But someone would have to stay behind to trigger the final surge. He looked at Lyra, then at the chief who was fighting off nearby drones. His mind was already made up. "Lyra," he said softly. "Get everyone out of here." She shook her head, tears forming. "No. I stay with you," Ethan smiled faintly. "You already saved me." "That's enough." Before she could stop him, he ran toward the main conduit. Ripping open the panel, sparks burst into the air. He connected his power core, his own life monitor flashing red. The ground began to quake violently. He turned back one last time, shouting, "Tell them humans kept their promise." Then he pressed the trigger. The swamp erupted in blinding light. The explosion tore through the jungle, swallowing the machines and the bunker in fire. The sound thundered for miles, shaking the sky. Lyra screamed his name, falling to her knees as the fire faded into smoke. When the light finally died, the machine was gone, so was Ethan days later. The tribes rebuilt once more at the heart of the swamp. They planted a tree where the explosion had scorched the earth. It glowed faintly blue, its roots pulsing with new life. The chief named it the Tree of Promise, and every child born under its branches was told the story of the human who came from the stars, the one who fought for them and became legend at night. When the wind passed through the branches, it whispered softly, as if someone far away was still watching, still protecting, and deep in the heart of the swamp. Beneath the roots, a small light blinked once, faint but steady. Human heartbeat, still alive, still waiting.